Greetings and welcome back to one of my talks. Today I want to talk about something controversial. Well, apparently it's controversial. And I'd like to talk about this newfangled sexual orientation, apparently this exists, called player-sexuality. Specifically as it applies to Dragon Age, Inquisition, and Dragon Age 2. Apparently, from what I've gathered in recent exchanges with various denizens of the internet, the romanceable characters in Dragon Age 2 were not bisexual, except Isabella, but player-sexual. Player-sexuality apparently means that you, on a whim, can simply change the sexual orientation of the characters that you romance in the game. You can say, Character X, you're gay now. Character Y, you're straight now. You're whatever you want. Now, I'm fairly indifferent to romances per se, although the ones in Dragon Age Origins were fairly well done. But a lot of people invest energy in this, and so I'm curious what this all is, or I was curious. Now, for the record, like I said, I'm indifferent, but I think if everyone is bisexual, or let's start from the top. Let's talk about reality. I know reality doesn't apply to fantasy games, but the simple fact is, just because a game is a fantasy game doesn't necessarily mean anything goes. I had a discussion with a gay gentleman online in exchange about this very topic, and when I asked him if he could simply, as he explained it, in the game you can just appeal as a character to one of your companions and they start liking you and also want to bed you. I asked him if he felt that way about women. He didn't reply, but the silence was deafening in the sense that the silence was an answer. That doesn't work in real life. I don't really see a reason for it to work in a fantasy game unless you give a reason. That is to say, I would have absolutely no problem with all the characters being bisexual. I don't want to use this word player-sexual if there were some reason. Let's have a look at Mass Effect. Asari are monogendered, essentially all female, but monogendered, and so that is the explanation for their apparent bisexuality. It can go either way. Most other races are not described as such. What if at the beginning of the series of Dragon Age, the developers had explained that in the world of Thetis, magical energies flowing through, this is just made up nonsense, but flowing through the Fade imbue both males and females with equal tendencies toward sexuality, and all differences between them are purely cosmetic, and they are equal in every regard, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it would have been a pretty shitty explanation, but at least it would have been an explanation rather than everyone is bisexual, player-sexual. So the argument I'm trying to make is, yes, a high fantasy game has obviously fantastical elements, but in terms of actual character development and the nature of characters, I think such characters should follow a pattern of development that's somewhat familiar to normal human beings in our universe. Something that's just bizarre and foreign, such as player-sexuality, that you snap and then turn a switch on. Literally, a turn switch on for romanceable companions, whether they're heterosexual or gay or whatever. This simply doesn't make sense. Now, I'd argue that sexuality is important to character integrity, and I know I'll probably get accusations of being a homophobe or something, but it's quite far from the case. In fact, I would much rather see a robust, fully fleshed out gay character than 4 or 5 companions that are all just bisexual on the whim of the protagonist. It is ludicrous. Bioware should do what they did in Dragon Age Origins. The fact that Zevran was bisexual was completely believable. And why? Well, for a couple of reasons. One major reason was his background, coming from Antiva, being familiar with whorehouses, being an assassin. All these things sort of contributed to libidinous and yeah, very sort of flesh-oriented, carnal-driven character, and that kind of makes sense. And Liliana was kind of a lost soul. I can see the indecision there. I can see her going both ways. Whereas Alistair, I could never imagine Alistair as a gay man. His chivalry, for example, which is far more. I mean, chivalry, generally speaking, the whole concept is one that's directed towards females. Likewise with Morrigan, I just don't see that happening. Although I suppose it's somewhat more likely than with Alistair. But if they could do good romances in Dragon Age Inquisition along these lines, that would be good. And as bad as most of the romances are in Mass Effect 3 in particular, the characters have distinct sexual orientations. Traynor is a lesbian, Steve is gay, and you can't romance them if you're not of that particular orientation as a Shepard, although male Shepard being suddenly gay was a bit odd. Neither here nor there, different story. So why is it important to character integrity that characters have a good if they're going to all be bisexual, have a good reason? Well, sexuality, and I'm basing this on reality, this is one of these things I think that should transfer from reality over to a fantasy game, is a rather important determinant of who you are as a person. I know that's not very PC to say, but one only needs to consider, for example, many studies and data that have been accumulated over the years indicating that, for example, homosexual men have more symmetrical brain hemispheres, which would be very similar to heterosexual women who also tend to have more symmetrical brain hemispheres, and lesbian women tend to have more asymmetrical, just as heterosexual men, and so on and so forth. This sexual orientation influences often the choice whether or not one wishes to reproduce, if the interest is there to begin with or not at all, and so on and so forth. It's not the absolute determinant of character, but it certainly can affect your life goals, dreams, desires, so on and so forth. It'll also affect how you interact with people, be they women or men. It will affect your interaction, how you perceive them on a conscious level, as well as the important autopilot non-conscious functions. Now, why that couldn't be applicable to fantasy world characters is beyond me. If you have a fantasy world where everything goes, then everything can go for character development too. You don't need character development. You don't even need to pretend, for example, that there's a getting to know each other of the characters, because that's how it would work in reality, right? They just know each other. You see, there needs to be a certain sense of continuity and consistency in characters. And I think Smudboy mentioned this in the interview I had given him, or had with him, or whatever. Yeah, that if everyone's going to be bisexual, there kind of needs to be a good reason for it. Why is everyone bisexual? Well, it turns out they're not bisexual, they're player-sexual. An on and off switch? How does this make any sense? More importantly, I think the most important point to be made here, however, is, at the end of the day, this is fan service. It's fan service for the following reason. Any story should be story-driven. If you're going to tell a story, be it in a game or a film or a play or whatever, the elements in that game should be relevant to the story. Now, how is everyone being bisexual relevant to the story of whatever Dragon Age Inquisition might be, or how was it relevant to Dragon Age 2? It wasn't. It was just something they appended onto the game because a certain sector of fans wanted it that way. Now, there might be good economic reasons, I'm unaware myself, for doing so. Maybe Bioware did marketing research and realized that they can increase their profits by X percentage if they do this, and they saw a marked increase when they had done so in self-professed gay and lesbian and bisexual people in real life. And then they saw their profits were going up, and why can't they just say that? Why can't they state that rather than just making everyone bisexual? It seems completely random. And people say it makes the use of resources less taxing, or rather, it uses fewer resources. I don't think so. I think it would involve fewer resources to go, say, the route of Dragon Age Origins, where you have a Zevran, a Liliana, some other character, a straight character, and two straight characters. What's wrong with that? Yes, of course, the gay and lesbian community would get upset because it's not being fair to them and blah, 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 blah. I just don't understand this. And you would think a guy like Gator, who was openly gay, would try to at least flesh out a robust gay character, rather than just going down this player sexual route. This is made up nonsense. Player sexuality exists in no other game. It doesn't exist in Star Wars. It doesn't exist in Mass Effect. And if it's going to exist in Dragon Age, you need pressing reasons. Maybe you could come up with some cockamamie reason for explaining why the player character can turn like an on and off switch. Player sexuality, i.e., the sexual orientation of other characters, like a light switch. So now you're gay, now you're straight, now you're whatever I want you to be. Think about how absurd that sounds. Your companions are whatever the player wants them to be. That is not equivalent to saying the protagonist or the player character has a strong influence on his companions and can sway them. It's literally saying the companions are whatever the player wants them to be. So essentially they're automatons. They're just characters that are there, and you can turn an on and off switch there. You might as well just give them commands. You can just tell them to shoot arrows and crossbow bolts at random enemies or just random passerbyers. Why not? This is how absurd this is. What you're literally saying when you're saying player sexuality is some legitimate mode of operation is saying, well, your companions have no autonomy and are completely at the beck and call of the player character and have no personality other than what the character tells them to be, because it might not be the ultimate determining factor, but sexual orientation is a fairly important factor in one's personality and one's person, and so on and so forth. The idea that the protagonist can simply switch on and off as you would or she would a light switch, the sexuality of characters is a bit absurd. And why can't BioWare just come out and be honest and say it's fan service? And the problem with this is not that I care really terribly much that everyone's bisexual. I think it's absurd. It doesn't really make sense, and it's a waste of resources. But it just shows me that BioWare is not intent or concentrating on telling a story. I think Smudboy said it a lot better in his talk. But the simple fact is when you're driven to tell a story, a good one that you at least think, as an author, think is good, you don't care about what the reactions of other people are going to be. You care about the story itself, whether you offend people or not, whether you make people are happy or not. The story is key. The story takes primacy. By diverting energy and making everyone bisexual to appease a certain sector of the fan base, this shows that, to me, that they are not very interested in telling a story, but rather appealing to certain sectors of the fan base. The fact that, and Smudboy talked about this, that the Dragon Age Inquisition seems so focused on events rather than character development, which, as it turns out, since everyone is bisexual on a whim, or player sexual, sorry, that probably doesn't really matter because your companions will just do whatever you tell them to do because they're like robots, automatons. People who argue that in a fantasy game anything goes should at least argue that there should be explanations. We know, for example, once again, in Mass Effect, that Asari are monogendered and hence bisexual, effectively. There are reasons for this. They cite reasons for it. They explain it. Random bisexuality of virtually every character in the game potentially has thus far not been explained. I'm not saying it's inexplicable, but they should at least give an explanation. Why can't they just invest the resources in creating maybe one bisexual character, one robust gay character, two straight characters? I don't even care. In fact, I'd rather have two gays and two lesbians, then everyone is randomly being bisexual. It's absurd. So ultimately, I'm fairly indifferent to the romance, despite the fact that you might seem I'm very sort of worked up about this. It's not really that I'm worked up, but I just hate when people are not being objective and irrational. And this whole notion of player sexuality, the light switch of sexual orientation, the equivalent at least, is highly irrational to me. And it's just pandering to a certain subsector or sector of the fan base, and there's no other explanation for it. It's either laziness or it's pandering, and it's completely irrelevant to the story apparently. But the story should have relevant elements in the characters that are participating in the story. I don't really get why people are missing that point, but I don't get a lot of things in this world. Or rather, I don't get that a lot of other people don't get a lot of things in this world. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that. I will be posting the Mass Effect stuff soon again. And as always, thanks for watching, and may the gods watch over you and have mercy on your soul. Bye-bye.